Thank you, Sam. And thank you all for coming out. I have a long, weird history with Newton in that I used to work for Planned Parenthood in Wichita. My primary job was doing sex education, and I used to come to Newton a lot to give programs for that. So I've been to a lot of schools. I'm glad you caught that high school presentation I did. So I spent a lot of time driving back and forth through Wichita and Newton, and a lot of time at various schools in Newton. So that's always fun. So I'm curious, now, is this part of a book club? Do you all have a formal book club?
We have 5 book clubs, but this is not.
This is not. So I always feel like I always have a split itinerary, which is when a book first comes out, you go to a lot of bookstores and you talk to a lot of people about the book, and there are people who've never read the book because it's literally like, oh, it's only been out 3 days, so so no one's read. But then when I come to events later in the the book has been out for 2 months now, and I think, have people read the book? And then I always feel super weird about reading from the book, because then I'm like, oh, is this a room full of people who's read the book already, or at least read the first few chapters? And it's so good. I'm relieved that this is not a awkward 2-month out book event. So this book is an oddity for me. I didn't realize when I started writing it that it was going to be billed as a thriller or a suspense novel, but then after I gave it to my agent, that's 100% how she viewed it. And it's basically how editors at publishing houses viewed it as well, that it was a thriller. And some editors were like, we don't want a thriller from you. And I was like, it's too bad. But luckily someone did, which is how I end up very awkwardly being like, I don't know, I don't write thrillers. Chapter 1. My head hurt and my mouth was dry, but at least I hadn't woken up on the floor with my air mattress deflated underneath me. For a minute, I felt like I might vomit. Until that feeling passed, I stayed very still and kept my eyes closed against the sunlight. I wasn't ready to deal with the morning or the afternoon or the night. I was not prepared to deal with time. I'd taken my car back to the bank the day before. I could have waited for them to repossess it, but I hated surprises, unexpected news, scary movies, surprise parties. Sure, it's a party, but with people popping out from behind furniture to shout at you. There's nothing fun about that. If I left it up to the bank, I would wake up some rapidly approaching morning and my car would be gone. Instead of waiting for the repo jump scare, I did what the customer service rep at the bank called voluntary repossession. It won't look as bad on your credit report if you turn it over, she'd said. That wasn't true. I didn't call her on it. After all, it wasn't her fault I'd lost my job and stopped paying my car loan. At the bank headquarters, I handed in my keys and left my car. Then I took 5 different buses back to the apartment, where I was behind on the rent by 2 months, and the landlord had already served me with my 3-day notice to quit. I walked the last few blocks from the bus stop, tired and dripping with sweat, to find Riley sitting on the apartment steps. Riley, who knew how much I hated surprises, had arrived unannounced to pick up the things he left at the apartment when he moved out. He seemed softer and paler, with his hair long past shaggy, like living with his parents had turned him into a teenager again. Had we gotten drunk? Was that why I felt so awful? Had I slept with him? I slithered my hand off the mattress, reaching for my phone, but instead of carpet, I felt wood, a nightstand instead of the floor. I was dreaming, or I had time traveled back to before I sold my bedroom furniture, dressers, nightstand, bed frame, mattress, everything for $300. Enough to pay my phone bill and my car insurance and buy groceries for 1 more month. Since it probably wasn't time travel, I opened my eyes to figure out where I was. A nice bedroom, wallpapered, furnished with dark wood furniture and gauzy curtains. In the last 2 weeks, I'd texted everyone I could think of, hoping someone had a couch I could sleep on or a corner where I could put my leaky air mattress. But it turned out I didn't have any friends like that. All I had were acquaintances who said things like, I wish I could, but I don't think my roommates would be okay with that. So whose house was this? I might have panicked, not knowing where I was, but the world seemed so blurry. Behind my right eye was a dark, thumping pain, and when I sat up, the nausea returned. Through an open door, I could see a bathroom. I swung my legs off the bed and onto a thick pattern rug over hardwood floors. I'd slept with my shoes on someone's bed. Holding my hand over my mouth, I shuffled into the bathroom, which was done in yellow tile with peach fixtures. The wallpaper was tropical flowers with peach-faced lovebirds hidden here and there. Kneeling in front of the toilet, I cataloged what was in my line of sight. A cracked tile on the wall, broken grout lines on the floor, the chrome on the flush handle worn through to brass, old but clean. Along the top of the toilet tank stood a row of full-size toiletries, not like a hotel. In the end, I didn't vomit. I also didn't remember where I was. I used the toilet, washed my hands, and drank from the faucet. My mouth was so dry. Then I went back to the bedroom to get my phone. Except my laptop bag wasn't there. Through the buzz of my headache, I tried to think logically. No bag meant no phone, but it also meant no wallet, no ID, and no money. Not that I had much left. I sat down on the edge of the bed trying to figure out what had happened after Riley showed up, but that was all blurry too. As the buzzing headache started to fade, my confusion converted to anxiety. I checked all the drawers in the bedroom, thinking my bag might be in one, but they were empty except for someone else's clothes. 2 other doors led out of the room. One was a closet, the other wouldn't open. I twisted the glass knob carefully at first, then harder, trying to understand how to open it. I was convinced it was my mistake because I was groggy. There would be a harmless explanation for why my bag wasn't there, for why the door wouldn't open. I knocked on the door and said, "Hello?" Nobody answered. Pressing my shoulder against the door as I turned the knob, I wondered how hard it was to kick a door open. You see it on TV, but that doesn't give you any idea how difficult it is in real life. Also, it seemed to everything loud, rude, destructive. It was darker now than it had been when I woke up. Not morning, but evening. I went to the windows and pulled back the curtains. I was on the 2nd floor looking out over a large fenced yard. Beyond that, where I expected to see the Kansas City skyline, there was nothing but trees. As I stared out at the sunset, I noticed the bars on the windows, black wrought iron bars from top to bottom in both windows. In the bathroom, that window was barred too. "Are you hungry?" the woman said. I rushed back into the bedroom, but I was alone. Next to the door was a little metal speaker mounted to the wall. "Talia," I said. The name bubbled to the surface with no effort. "Yes or no," the woman said. No, Talia had a British accent. This woman sounded American. "Yes, I'm hungry." If this woman brought food, she would have to open the door. I could see her and talk to her, find out where I was, sit at the table facing the door and wait. Orders. I was locked in and receiving orders. I wasn't a guest. How had I ended up there? The answer had to be Talia. After Riley left, I'd gone to the coffee shop because it was closer than the library, and the day was already miserably hot. I'd been there filling out job applications for about an hour when a barista came by my table and said, "The Wi-Fi is supposed to be for paying customers. Are you going to order something?" I wasn't. Too embarrassed to argue, I'd apologized and made my shame-faced escape. On the way out, I bumped into a woman and apologized again. Outside, I cursed and cried, but it wasn't the barista's fault. You can't run a business by letting people who can't afford coffee take up table space and use your Wi-Fi. The woman I'd bumped into found me outside sniffling and sitting on the sidewalk with my laptop. I felt guilty, but I was stealing the coffee shop's Wi-Fi right through the wall. "You all right, love?" she said. "I heard what the barista said to you, little twat." "I'm fine, thanks. It's not his fault." "Still a little twat, and you weren't hurting anybody. Anyway, my name is Talia." She was white, somewhere between 50 and 60, with a streak of gray in her dark hair. Despite the heat, she wore a matching sweater set, red lipstick, and a bunch of gold jewelry. She held out her manicured hand so that I felt obligated to shake it with my grubby, on the verge of homeless hand. "I'm Beatrice." "You don't look all right, Beatrice. Do you want to tell me what's happened?" I wasn't sure that I did, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than invisible. What had I told Talia? Everything? She'd bought me a coffee, the kind of big frothy iced coffee with a crown of whipped cream like I hadn't had in months. And we sat in her car while I told her my sob story. "Don't you worry, love. I bet I've got a job for you," she said, which seemed like a spark of light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. Don't most jobs start with an offer from a stranger? There was no clock in the room, but I guessed I'd been sitting at the table for about 10 minutes before I heard the door being unlatched. When it opened, a woman rolled in a cart like they sometimes bring your room service on in a hotel. I guessed she was in her early 40s with olive skin and dark blonde hair. I would have considered her pretty, but there was something worn about her face. She had on jeans, house slippers, and a long gray cardigan. Put your hands on the table, she said. After I did, she lifted a tray off the cart and set it in front of me as she closed the door. Then she rolled the cart back to the door. Where am I? You're here. That's all you need to know. You're here to be a nanny. If you do your job, you'll be fine. If you don't do your job, you won't be fine. Do you understand? No, I don't understand at all. Eat your dinner. She looked annoyed, which made me angry. I was the one who was locked in a room, so why was she annoyed? Hidden in her sweater pocket, she turned something over in her hand. A cell phone? Did she have my phone? I want my phone and I want to leave. I hoped my voice wasn't shaking, but it had started to sink in that maybe this wasn't a misunderstanding. Maybe I had been kidnapped. We're 70 miles from the nearest neighbor and nobody knows you're here. If you try to leave, you'll die. How's that for clear? They don't like problems, so you stay and work or you get dead. Who are they? Dangerous people. I work for them. Now you work for them, too. You've got a few days before the kid gets here. I'll bring you food. You eat and rest. In a couple days, I'll show you the rest of your area. My area? I was trying to understand that this woman had told me I would be murdered if I didn't do what I was told by some dangerous people. They. For now, your area is this floor. Your room, the kids' rooms, the classroom, and the dining room, she said. Kids, are there more than one? There are however many kids they send. The clothes in the dresser are for you. There are toiletries in the bathroom. If you need anything, within reason, you tell me, okay? I want to talk to Talia, I said. The woman laughed. That's not going to happen. Talia is a recruiter. She finds losers. Nobodies that they can use. She found you. Now her job is done. You're never going to see her again. Can I call my family? Tell them I'm okay so they don't worry about me? She laughed harder but stopped as soon as I stood up from the table, like a faucet being turned off. Sit down. The look she gave me was a warning. I didn't mean anything aggressive by standing up, but if we were talking, I wanted to talk as equals. After a minute of staring at each other, I sat down. You want to call your daddy, she said, the one who doesn't care you're homeless? You think he's worried about you? Had I told Talia that? Thinking about spilling those secrets to a stranger mortified me, so much that I couldn't bear to sit there with this woman sneering at me. There wasn't a lock on the inside of the door. I knew that from my attempts to open it, so that meant it was unlocked. What was the woman going to do if I walked out? I stood up and took a step toward the door. She pulled out the thing she'd been toying with in her sweater pocket and pointed it at me. Not a phone, but a taser. Something hit my belly that felt like an electric bee sting, and my whole body locked up. The floor rushed up toward me, and I landed hard on the rug beside the bed. My arms and legs wouldn't move, and the bee sting feeling spread from my belly up over my chest. When it stopped, I lay on the floor panting and crying. The woman hadn't moved from her place by the door. She looked down at me as she wound up the wires to her taser. The door opened behind her and a man stepped inside. He was tall and powerfully built. He wore a pair of cargo pants tucked into military-style boots and a blue satin athletic jacket. I told you she was going to try something. Redheads are feisty, he said, bending over to look at me. I didn't feel very feisty lying on the floor, unable to move. And I told you I could handle her. Doesn't it look like she's been handled? Yeah, sure. Go. The man shrugged and left, pulling the door closed behind him. As he did, his jacket swung open, revealing a gun in a holster under his arm. My father was into guns, so I'd grown up around them, but seeing one in a situation where I was helpless, where I'd already been threatened with death, was more terrifying than I'd expected. I couldn't stop shivering from fear or from the taser. Don't fuck with me, you little drama queen. You do what I say and you'll be all right. You fuck around and you'll find out there are worse places than this they can send you to. The woman opened the door, rolled the empty cart out, and closed the door. After I stopped crying and shivering, I stayed on the rug until the sun was gone, leaving not even a faint blue glow. In the dark, I crawled to the door and tried the knob. Locked. Beside the door, underneath the speaker, was an old-fashioned push-button switch that when I pressed it, turned on a pendant light over the table. In a daze, I sat at the table and took the lid off the dinner tray. There was a sandwich on a plate, a bowl of potato salad, a bowl of grapes, and a plate with 2 chocolate chip cookies. An empty plastic tumbler lay on its side between the bowls. I was so hungry, that I felt weak. I hadn't eaten anything in the last 2 days except a granola bar and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And the coffee Talia had bought me, the coffee I'd so gratefully slurped down sitting in her car. At least now I knew how I'd ended up there. Obviously, Talia had put something in my coffee, powerful enough to knock me out for a whole day. Maybe this other woman planned to drug me too. I went around the room trying to decide if there was a way for me to escape, but the door was locked and the windows were barred. The only light outside besides the stars came from windows on the floor below me. Otherwise, it was completely dark out. Since there was no escape route, I searched for something I could use as a weapon. The one thing missing from the toiletries in the bathroom was a razor. There was nothing under the bed. In the closet were extra blankets and a dozen plastic hangers. I supposed those could be used as a weapon in a pinch, not necessarily by me, but by somebody. The chair was sturdy, but only useful as a weapon on someone unsuspecting, and these people weren't unsuspecting. No escape, no weapons, and I was hungry. I filled the empty glass from the bathroom faucet and sat down to my meal, which was better than what I'd been getting from the food bank. The sandwich was turkey with lettuce, tomato, and mayo on fresh bread, which I disassembled layer by layer before putting it back together. It seemed like it would be hard to plant drugs in a sandwich, so I went ahead and ate it. The potato salad looked homemade and was still warm, but if there were drugs, they'd be in that. The cookies were store-bought, so they were probably safe. The grapes I didn't know. Could you drug grapes? I ate them anyway because the food bank never had fresh produce. After I finished eating, I waited. Fear of the unexpected had me running through scenarios in my head. Would the woman come back? Would the man with the gun come back? Thinking about that, I dragged the chair from the table and jammed it up under the doorknob. They could lock me in, but I would lock them out. Then I checked for cameras because it seemed likely that people who drug and kidnap me might also spy on me. After spending a ridiculous amount of time squinting at every screw and running my fingers over every dark spot on the furniture, I gave up. If there were cameras, I couldn't find them. Finally, I did what you do even in inhospitable hotels. I brushed my teeth and took a shower. It felt like it had been a lot longer than 12 hours since I'd done either. The toiletries looked expensive, all the packaging printed in Japanese. Surely I wasn't in Japan. That was something to throw me off. Alongside the toiletries were a box of tampons and a box of pads. The labels on them were in English, French, and Arabic. Someone had planned pretty thoroughly for me, right down to the clothes in the drawers, which were my size. 2 sets of pajamas, 3 long-sleeved t-shirts, 2 pairs of yoga pants, a pair of stretch khaki pants, plus underwear, bras, and socks. Everything seemed new, but with the labels cut out. Undressed under the bathroom lights, I found at least a dozen bruises on me. A long scuff down my back, a purple square on my hip, dark rings around each wrist. Besides the bright red taser marks on my belly, there were 3 circular bruises on my right thigh, with scabs in the centers of them. So Talia had put something in my coffee, but later someone had injected me with more drugs. After that, I must have been loaded in a car and driven to the house in the woods, apparently by somebody who hadn't been too concerned with handling me carefully. The man with the gun? Wanting to be ready for whatever happened, I chose the khakis and a shirt instead of pajamas. I even put on socks and my shoes. Then I sat on the edge of a strange bed, fully dressed, trying to be prepared for something unknown. Out of habit, I kept reaching for my phone in my pocket, but my phone was gone, and the khakis didn't even have pockets. There was a bookcase in the corner beside the door. Half of the books were literary classics that had never been opened, and the rest were hardback bestsellers from the last 5 years or so, mostly mysteries and thrillers. I picked a murder mystery that gave no clue about where it had come from, not a price sticker, a name written in the front, or a receipt left in between the pages. I read a few chapters, trying to stay awake, but my eyes kept drooping closed. Whether that was from the drugs or exhaustion, it didn't matter. After I gave up on the book, I sat up yawning and waiting for the sudden and malevolent appearance of the mysterious they the woman had referred to. They had brought me here. They could send me someplace worse. They might kill me. Eventually, I wore myself out, worrying. By my best guess, it was past midnight. The lights from the first floor had been turned off. Nobody was coming. I fell asleep, then jolted awake, shivering, my eyes bleary from the lights. I got up to turn the lights off and tested the locked door. Knowing it was a reckless move, I took my shoes off, pulled back the covers on the bed, and crawled under them. It felt heavenly. Soft mattress, crisp clean sheets, big fluffy pillows. For a minute, I actually felt grateful, until I remembered that the door was locked, and outside, trees sprawled out darkly as far as I could see. Oh. The general premise being that a young woman who's very much down on her luck, lost her job, has had to give up her car because she can't afford the payments, has lost her apartment, is about to lose her apartment, she knows in a matter of days, falls in with a kindly stranger who offers her a job and instead takes her to an isolated house in the woods and locks her in a room. So in some ways, this is your standard thriller in the sense that it's a kidnapping with scary things happening. And in the other, it's also very much about human trafficking and how incredibly mundane human trafficking is. Because that's one of the things I want to talk about is how people go, oh, I've got this great job. And then they go to the great job and the door's locked and no one will let them out. And someone takes their passport and they don't have any way to contact their family. And next thing you know, it's 2 years later and they finally get rescued from whatever horror scenario they've been in, or they don't. They end up dead and on the news of, oh, wealthy family's nanny murdered, or, one of the common things that's happening right now is people being lured with tech jobs in Asia. Great salary, oh, you're perfect for this. They fly people in and then they put them in a warehouse where, again, the doors are locked. They can't have access to a phone and they're being forced to send scam emails or scam text messages. So there's always this chance when you get a scam email or a scam text message that it's coming from someone who's literally been imprisoned and enslaved to send those scam messages, which is always extra terrifying to me when I get them, because I think, sure, there are people who are out there doing it for their own benefit, but there are also people stuck in places in Thailand and even in Hong Kong where they've just been trapped. And that sort of stuff happens regularly. So that's my obsession. What do we want to talk about besides my obsession?
Who do you find out how this is going on?
Mostly there are news articles. I follow an agency that specifically their job, the thing that they have set for themselves is to rescue people who've been trapped in trafficking scenarios related to tech jobs. And then there are all kinds of agencies who do reporting on regular human trafficking, the old-fashioned kind, where it's like, oh, you got a job as a nanny and it's in a country where you don't speak the language and the family took your passport and now you spend 24 hours a day locked in a room with the child you're taking care of. So yeah, there's actually a surprising amount of reporting out there for as little as we talk about it publicly.
So you said you were kind of shocked they billed it as a thriller. What did you think it was going?
I'm just gonna confess, I thought it was just the same weird shit I'm always writing. I really did. I really just thought, well, this is because of course my previous novel to this is also in my mind just as crime thrillerish as this book is, and it's about a young woman who's a drug mule who delivers 2 suitcases full of marijuana from Colorado on the Amtrak train to Newton. So there's my other connection to Newton, is taking the train by here and thinking, that's pretty unpopulated. I bet you could bring drugs in here. And so I do a lot of speculating about crimes or people committing nearby. So yeah, I didn't think that this was that far removed from the kinds of things I've written previously, but I guess publishing felt differently.
So I really enjoyed the excerpt you just read, so thank you for that. It starts, it starts pretty rapidly, right? I mean, it's like very quickly we're on board with the protagonist, understanding her scenario, what trouble she's in with about to be homeless, and then moves very rapidly into the main conflict scenario of the book with the kidnapping and human trafficking. I'm wondering, like, did that come together pretty naturally? Like, did you just sit down at a keyboard and start writing that, or did you kind of have to like write more of the background and then take out? And then
I always write more background than I need. I mean, I'm one of those. I think of myself as a Michelangelo writer. He always referred to the notion that the block of marble already contained the statue that he wanted to carve out of it. And his job was literally just to remove the excess marble so that you could see the statue inside of it. And I feel that I write that way a lot because I tend to write absolutely everything I can think of and absolutely everything that I might want to know. And then later I just have to shave off all of that stuff. And then sometimes you have little tidbits of like, oh, it's a flashback. You're like, oh, that's handy. I can use that scene I read that I was otherwise never going to get to use. But this book started really quickly in the sense that I think about 3 years ago, I realized I didn't know any phone numbers except for one. And I thought, if something bad ever happened to me, what am I gonna, and I needed to desperately call somebody, what am I gonna say to the employees at the pizza shuttle in Manhattan, Kansas? Does anybody else know that phone number? Anybody else a K-State student?
Oh,
It's a curse for people who went to K-State during a certain period of time where you know the pizza shuttle number because you heard it 5,000 times a week. And I later, of course, I went on to memorize my sister's phone number so that in fact I would not have to call the pizza shuttle and say, help, I've been kidnapped. But that's what started me thinking is I was like, the advent of cell phones has really done away with this notion that that you know people and you can just call them. If you get access to a phone, you can just call them because unless you're one of those super lucky people whose parents are still alive and your parents still live in the house that you grew up in and they still have the same phone number, yeah, like, okay, whose phone number did you memorize? So that started pretty quickly. I kept obsessing about that. And then finally I was like, oh God, I can just picture this. Person gets kidnapped, they finally get access to a phone. Who are they going to call? Because if you call 911 on a cell phone, they're going to be like, okay, where are you? You're like, I don't know. And they can't find you on a cell phone. So I don't know. It started really quickly in that sense, and then I became obsessed with that image of people who don't know phone numbers.
well, I mean, you may go on to address this in this book, but I'm wondering, is it also to think, I mean, when I think of trafficking, my mind kind of just goes to sex trafficking. But labor trafficking
It's so prevalent.
also prevalent. And I'm wondering how do people end up being somebody how do you end up being the person who, I mean, surely people don't just sit down one day and it's like, you know what, I'm gonna try and get some slaves. I mean, right? I mean, is it like, how do you?
I mean, history suggests otherwise.
Well,
I mean, I'm sorry, isn't that essentially how we ended up with so many enslaved people in this country? Is that a lot of rich people were like, I would like it better if I didn't have to pay these people a salary. And that's, I mean, and when you read the articles about people who've been trafficked, like people like nannies, which is a pretty common one, it's literally wealthy families who feel entitled to the labor of other people. And honestly, if you've met any super rich people, they do in fact feel entitled to the free labor of other people. Everything is for their benefit. Everything, they don't really care about the little people, the little grubby people. So yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly how it happens. The same way, the other major area where we see trafficking is in agriculture, where it's the same deal, where you get immigrant workers who don't speak the language, and you get them into a place where they don't have access to their passport, they don't have a phone, they don't have any way to get away, there's no transportation, and you just keep them there, and it's awesome because then you don't have to pay them a salary, you can just give them room and board, and I really think there are people out there that seems totally okay to them.
I used to take care of it.
I feel like ICE is maybe contributing to the problem because then it's even easier because if people who have been trafficked can't approach the police because they fear being deported, especially if they fear being deported back to an even more dangerous situation, they can't go to the police. They just can't. And so they're stuck. And that's often the trend I see with domestic trafficking is the reporting suggests that they were so afraid of the police and being deported that they just didn't try to escape and didn't try to do anything about it, which is terrifying.
I have read most of the book and I think it's fascinating how you, first of all, the psychological part is that it can happen. It's not just like, oh, that's made for TV, or a living thing. And the way that you portray the people that are keeping her there and how they are just as under the same system just on different levels and how it's like, some have kept their humanity a little bit more than others, and just that's a fascinating look on how it's a live or die kind of situation, and I will choose to do this to you so that I don't have it done to me, and how scary that is, I think.
I think maybe that is in some ways the most terrifying part, is that, you know, if you were in this situation, that you might in fact be controlled by people who have themselves been trafficked. And in this book specifically, yes, it's, you know, the people who've survived their trafficking experience and are terrified of the people who help them and have essentially been brainwashed. They're like, well, if I escape, bad things will happen, not just to me, but to my loved ones that I've left behind. And so I can never, I can't betray these people, even though they're terrible.
And I've done bad things, so.
Exactly. I've done terrible things, and I would also hate to end up being in trouble for them. And we see that, I mean, historically that's true too. I mean, within this country, in terms of people who were enslaved, is that often following generations, you know, you can get the people you enslaved, you can get their kids on board with the concept of enslavement, and you can actually give them responsibilities, you know, under the guise of, oh, but see, you're special, so I'm trusting you to do these chores, but they're just essentially reinforcing the enslavement of other people. So yeah, it's frightening.
And then you end up with like, I mean, so it's basically, it's like you could end up with a victim who also feels implicated in the wrongdoing that's happening. So then it becomes psychologically more complicated.
And that's, I think, especially true in terms of sexual trafficking, where you see when you read about people who've been sexually trafficked, is that often the lower level workers, the people who are directly responsible for keeping these people locked up in these illegal brothels, are literally people who, like, that's their success, is they escaped from being sexually trafficked, but now their job is to keep other people in line in that same scenario. So you'll often see that the madam in charge of a brothel is someone who was trafficked, but now it's her job to keep other people in line. And so, yeah, people become frightened, like, okay, well, I know I was a victim, but I've also somehow become the bad guy, and I don't want to get in trouble.
Well, and then I really like the detail about the grapes and how she didn't normally get grapes in her day-to-day life. And I don't know, like, if that plays into the mindset that, like, I know no one obviously wants to be enslaved, but if you're gonna brainwash someone, giving them something, like, we have a society of people that are living day to day without fresh fruit, and that's fine. But then now they actually, like, it's almost like they get things they wouldn't normally get, that society doesn't to them as a whole.
Well, and I think for Beatrice, the main character of the book, that's part of her dilemma, is that in some ways she's living a kept life. She's no longer unemployed. She's no longer on the verge of homeless. She has a place to live. The food is provided free. All she has to do is put up with this horrifying scenario where she has to take care of these kids who've been kidnapped, and she has to witness sometimes horrifying things that happen, and she's not sure she's ever safe. But on the other hand, she's not living on a, you know, sleeping on a cardboard box, you know, down by the river. So she feels conflicted because there's a certain quality of safety to her kidnapping, while also being incredibly menacing.
Have you? You know, well, I was just thinking, last time I went through the Minneapolis airport, there's like an air trolley, there's a sign on the trolley that says, two people per day riding this trolley are being trafficked. It could be, you know, and that's not, I mean, that must be based on a real statistic, you know, of the travel and the likelihood. So that makes me, you know, it's like, so anyway, that kind of leads into the question of, have you, through researching this book, or maybe since it's been published, have you had a chance to talk to people that have had these kind of experiences?
Well, I've spoken via email with some people who have been through an organization that works primarily here in the Midwest and the West. And you'll see their stickers in rest stop bathrooms that basically, are you being tracked, you know, stuff like that, because that's a not uncommon trafficking source either, where people who are vulnerable are picked up by truck drivers and sold to traffickers. And the two people very specifically that I spoke to quite a bit with, that's exactly what happened to them, is that they were vulnerable. One of them was hitchhiking, one of them was stuck at a rest stop because her boyfriend had abandoned her there. And they both ended up being trafficked by long haul truckers who had a connection. And that was the real deal. It wasn't like these were dudes who had to find somebody to buy them. Dudes who already had a connection who were willing to buy women that they could pick up for free. So that's scary.
So you did all of this, research looking into trafficking, and obviously like part of the book, like it's kind of to spark a conversation or so people have an understanding this is going on. What would you say, like through all your research and all your looking, like what can a normal person do to try to like impact or try to prevent or address this issue? Or is it something normal people can address?
I feel like it's really difficult because obviously you can support organizations that are combating trafficking, through donation, through volunteer. And also I feel like sometimes it's just paying attention. Because I find that since I started working on this book, anytime I am on the highway and I stop at a gas station, I find myself really looking around at the people like, what's going on with you? You see a couple arguing, you're like, okay, is this a normal couple arguing or is this something worse? And part of that is just my writer's brain that's always catastrophizing everything. I don't know, that's just how my brain works. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the dilemma is what can regular people do? Because, the average person isn't going to be exposed to that unless they themselves end up trafficked. So yeah, that's part of the problem.
I have another question. You just mentioned about your writer's brain. I think, is this your 5th book or 6th book?
This is number 5 published, yes.
Well, congrats. That's awesome.
Thanks.
And so I'm wondering, like, your journey as a writer. How did you figure out what your subject matter is, the kind of stories you want or need to write, and what your voice is going to be as a novelist? It's a big question, but
Well, that is a good question. I've always wanted to write. When I was a little kid, that was the thing I wanted, and I was so excited when I don't know if you remember when you were like 4 or 5 and you were really figuring out books and you had finally moved beyond that Dick and Jane thing and you were really excited you could go to the school library or the public library and you're like, oh, there's so many things. And I remember when I found out that there were actually just regular people who got to write these books that were on the shelf and that people, I was like, oh my God, it's like when you find out the most magical thing in the world has an on-ramp for you. I mean, it's not like a really smooth on-ramp, but I remember being so excited by that. And that was literally the point at which I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do with my life. And sister will know, like some of my first books were mostly picture books before I knew how to write. I knew what books were and I was thrilled about them, but I didn't actually have the writing skills. One of my books, our oldest sister transcribed for me, so that was nice. Yeah, personal transcribe. But my grandfather used to bind the books for me. He had like a little rivet gun and he would bind them for me. And I just remember being so thrilled by that. Even if my first book was it was about a family of aliens, and it was a very thinly disguised knockoff of The Great Gazoo from the Flintstones, if you remember that. Yeah, you get your start somewhere. But in reality, then it was just reading, which is what I tell you. Like, if you want to be a writer, the best thing you can do for yourself is read everything, read it all, and then figure out what makes you excited. Because then that's how you know what you're going to write about. Which for me, it turned out and I still feel this way. Like I go to bookstores, I go to libraries, and so many of the books are by people who honestly are living awfully cushy lives and maybe have always you're like, oh, this person summers in Nantucket and this and so many stories are about, oh, they're wealthy people in New York City, which has zero connection to my life. I'm like, that doesn't really. So immediately the stories I wanted to write were for people from the West who had messed up lives. And part of that is the whole, my father was a drug dealer when I was a child and ran an extremely large methamphetamine manufacturing and distribution organization. All the way up from the Northern Plains down to Texas, and the sort of person who has a plane to deliver their goods, not just running drugs on cars. And so for me, those were the people that I was like, oh, they're sort of scuzzy people, but they are my people. And then conversely, I had people like my grandparents who were, old farmers and, grandma who's a secretary. And those are the people that I was interested in. I wasn't interested in a rich writer living in New York City. I don't ever read books about writers because we're the most boring people ever. But that's really what I wanted to do. And of course, I got to grad school thinking, here's my opportunity, and then I just found out, oh, these are all people who just want to write fancy books. Like that was my first impression of all my professors in grad school, was like, oh, you just want to write fancy books, and that's why I was like, oh, what I want to write are not fancy books. I want to write books about just regular people with messed up lives. And so yeah, that was sort of how it ended up. And then for a very long time, I looked for publishers who also were mostly interested in fancy books. And then occasionally you find that sweet spot where you can wiggle in and you write a book that people are like, this, I don't know anything about these people, but this is fascinating, which is essentially All the Ugly Wonderful Things is the book that was my breakthrough novel, where people read it and were like, really, that's what's going on out there? And I was like, well, in the 80s, that's certainly what was going on out there. But yeah, it's a messy journey. Oh.
Just curious, did you watch the series Breaking Bad, and did you relate to it in any way?
Did not watch it because I thought if this were reality, this dude would have been dead. Like quickety, somebody would have killed this guy. That's my impression of Breaking Bad, is that they really sort of, you know, make it look exciting and crazy and stuff for TV, but the reality is somebody who crossed too many people just ends up dead.
Opening games to the US Marshal shows up.
That also, it is all fun and games till US Marshals show up.
And you said you read a lot, obviously for your book, like what's some other favorite books you've read this year?
Oh, okay, so this year has been, you have to pardon me because I'm so terrible at titles. I blank constantly on titles. I think last year's favorite book is, the problem is it's still sticking with me. It's Deacon King Kong, you know, James McBride. That book is so amazing. I love that book. But also, I like Amy Suter Clark had a book this year that I really enjoyed, and whose title I cannot remember for the life of me. So I have a lot of that happens in my life. I'm obsessed with a friend of mine writes fantasy novels and novellas in this very large, elaborate universe that they have built. R.B. Limburg is their name. They won the World Fantasy Award this year, which is a big deal, for a book called The Yoke of Stars, which I believe is technically classified as a novella. It is this hugely sprawling universe that they have created with its own fascinating magic system that I would have never thought of in a million years. So it's that sort of thing where you read something, you're like, oh, that has never occurred to me. And just anything that has really, really deep characters where I'm certain that I could run into this character. Morgan Jerkins, I love. The Call Baby. I think that was last year. Call Baby was actually last year. So I'm also bad at time and titles. But those are many of the things that I like.
I stay in Kansas.
I didn't just stay in Kansas. I came back to Kansas. And part of it is people. I'm fascinated by people of Kansas because they are both deeply familiar to me and also very strange. We are not like other people. I really feel there is a level of like pragmatism and dryness to Kansans that I just really love. There's just because again, you know, my grandparents, my great grandparents all grew up in Kansas. So I just am fascinated. And so when I graduated college, I went to Japan, then I came back, then I went to Florida with a Marine. Don't ever move to Florida with a Marine. No one works so well during going to Texas. But the problem with Florida, and I don't know if you go to Florida, and I lived in Tampa, and you're driving away from Tampa, and you've got to go somewhere, and you're driving, and the city never goes away. And I find that exhausting. And I found that like the thing that was overwhelming to me is I was like, I just need to see the horizon. I just need to see something flat where I can be like, okay, there we are. And part of that's because I grew up.
I'll get.
Part of that is that I grew up out in Southwest Kansas, near, if you're familiar with the Cimarron grasslands, and a place called Point of Rocks. And Point of Rocks is the highest elevation out in southwest Kansas. And it was very popular among the Comanche and the Apache because you can see everything. It's a great lookout. And literally when you're there, you're looking down into like Texas and New Mexico. And here's the creepy part that I love. You can see the curvature of the earth. You go out to Point of Rocks and you can literally see that the earth curves. That's how flat it is out there. And that's what I grew up with and what I love and what, well, Walt Whitman also was a big fan of the prairie because what Walt Whitman had to say about it was essentially that although it's generally agreed that the Grand Canyon and the Rocky Mountains and all of those are like this beautiful, stirring, landscape and oh, but he said that he actually found that the prairies were more sustaining. That is, the prairies filled your heart fuller and it stayed full longer. And I was in college when I read that and I thought, yeah, that's really it. So that's why I came back to Kansas.
But I always thought the water, is flat, just like Kansas. That's why I thought so many people from Kansas joined the Navy, because it was.
It could be.
Which was this.
Although I'm still not super clear about how we have the Navy Veteran Memorial Highway running through Kansas. Or Submariner. It's the Submariner Veteran Memorial Highway that runs through Kansas. I'm like, did we have that many Kansas who were submariners? I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, in fact, though, I assume that's very similar. I'm terrified of the open ocean, so you won't catch me out on a boat.
When you write, you start from beginning to end, or do you know, you can write scenes that are going to happen later on? So you got a bunch of those hanging out there.
I'm a very chaotic writer. I don't write chronologically. And primarily that's because I don't know what's going to happen. I always think of myself as an investigative writer, which is as I'm writing, I'm investigating the characters, I'm investigating what's going on in their lives. I'm trying to figure out who are these people, what's happening around them, how are these things happening, why are they making the choices they make? And that's why the ending is never, I usually am about 3/4 of the way through before I know how it ends.
That's why you got a thriller going, right?
Maybe, but that's how all my books are, is I'm writing, and I'm like, oh, is that? Uh-oh, I didn't know that was gonna happen. And that happens to me a lot where I'm like, I had no clue what the ending of this was going to be. And this book is very similar. I didn't really know how it was gonna end until I got there. So yeah, I don't write chronologically, and this is why, again, I discard a lot of stuff that I don't need.
Do you get stuck in a corner doing that a lot of times?
Well, what happens is I get stuck in a branch. I don't get stuck in a corner. I get stuck in this could go this way, or it could go over here, it could go over here, go over here. And this is why All the Ugly and Wonderful Things is sort of a massively messy book. I mean, the book itself is not messy anymore, despite having 16 narrators. It was messy writing it because the final book is 120,000 words. The first draft was 300,000 words. So I literally had to cut more than half of the book off to publish it. But that was just because it branched, and there are different endings. Like I wrote entirely separate endings that went totally different ways depending upon what people chose. Oh my God, it's a choose your own adventure.
You do it like an ebook with hypertext and stuff, like.
It's funny, I do follow the choose your own adventure people on Threads. Maybe there's a reason for that. So yeah, I do find that I'm like, well, it depends on what this person does. If they do this thing, then that's how this book is gonna go. If they do something else, it's gonna go a different way.
So what got you started on this one? All the serials?
It was really, I imagined this woman in a scary situation calling the pizza shop in Manhattan. And then I was like, how did she end up here? Like, for real? How did she end up here? And then I just went back and was like, oh, how do you end up here? And that's all the research, of how people end up trafficked. And I wanted to sort of sneak it in because I feel like when people pick up a thriller about trafficking, they do expect it to be about sex trafficking. And I wanted people to expect sex trafficking and get instead nanny trafficking and groundskeeper trafficking and all the other kinds. So I sort of feel like I'm tricking people when I write a book like this. I'm like, you thought you were going to read about this one thing, but you're going to read about something different. you'll like it.
So you work for Planned Parenthood doing sex education to high school students in various locations. Is there a place for trafficking education in high schools, and is that like junior highs?
I feel like there should be, and in fact, I feel like that should be part of the whole kit and caboodle of the segment that high schools should be offering on sex education and life, planning, learning how to budget. I feel like there's just this whole area where we're not unified in the fact that teenagers need to know not only how do you, figure out how to afford things, how do you get jobs, how do you write checks when you write, but also what to look out for when you meet people, things your boyfriend should never say to you, places you shouldn't go if you don't know people there. I feel like there is a place in high school to learn about the scary parts of the world in a safe setting, as opposed to just going out there and being like, oops, I went to a party and someone drank my drink and I got raped and now I'm pregnant. Which is sort of our current level of education, where we're like, oops, after the fact, here's what you should have done.
Are you working on something now?
Yeah, inevitable question.
Always. I sent something to my agent that she's not sure about, so we'll see. And then of course I'm trying to write, and I worry that it's gonna fail spectacularly because I'm trying to write a thriller now. And the funny thing is, it has to do with the serial killer, except that I don't really like serial killer books, so the book isn't actually about the serial killer. It's just about normal people who are aware that there is a serial killer. So it's not about the police trying to catch the serial killer. It's just normal people who are like, oh shit, there's a serial killer in this town. Because, here, one of my points of obsession, in addition to terrible ways to die in a cave, is the FBI estimates that there are multiple serial killers operating in the I-70 corridor. Like, it's not just the I-70 killer who went and shot people and is presumed now dead, but just that they suspect that there are multiple serial killers operating on I-70 because there are so many desolate places with cheap motels and vulnerable women. Ding ding, it's a magic formula.
To dispose of bodies.
Exactly, and that's the desolate, like, oh, it's a motel and a gas station and there's nothing else around for 30 miles. Like, pretty sweet spot for a serial killer. And in Topeka, of course, as you drive by I-70 in Topeka, you will see little houses that are literally separated from I-70 by just a chain link fence. Like, they're just right there, which spooks me a little bit when I think about it. But so we'll see though whether I can purposefully write a thriller or not.
Well, and that, you said the people that are aware that there is a serial killer on the loose, I mean, that immediately that was people's lived reality in Wichita for a long time.
Bingo.
So.
Yes. And that's when he came back and started writing notes again, and everybody was like, we're gonna do this again. So yeah, terrible.
I hope this doesn't sound too strange, but it seems to me that parenting is another form of trafficking. Once you can get out of it again, I think.
I mean, it can be. I mean, certainly. I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that parents are actually the primary source of children being sexually trafficked. Parents who are like, yeah, for $100 you can have an hour with my 10-year-old.
I didn't mean it that way.
Oh, I do. I mean, I'm saying that's just it. It's same deal with agricultural work, where kids who don't necessarily want to be don't want to be picking tomatoes by the ton have to because their parents can make them. So yeah, I mean, parents do have this power to compel children to do things that otherwise they might not do. And of course that carries through into adulthood, as often adult children are still sort of beholden to their parents.
Well, that's not quite what I meant, but I meant in a more friendly way.
I guess I don't associate trafficking with friendly things.
Oh, yeah, you're born, and then you go, the doors aren't locked, you can't go anywhere because you're not old enough until you are.
That's why children are so vulnerable, because we literally are like, oh, you don't want to send your kids to school, that's fine.
So it's like a pattern of behavior that might, a relationship that would be appropriate between a parent and a child, if it's transposed into this captivity situation, those things might be really bad.
Right? I mean, And the problem is, of course, kids whose parents have trafficked them, then they themselves as adults are still vulnerable to everything.
You're still going way on without.
No, I know exactly what you mean, but I'm saying that's the very seed of the fact that children are most vulnerable with the people who they're related to, who have power over them.
I grew up with nice parents, so I'm not really.
I think everybody should grow up with nice parents if they can.
Fourth generation tangent.
It seems like a systemic issue, like, I mean, some women might be forced to feel that's their only choice to survive if they traffic their child.
Oh,
Yes, women and children, obviously, politically now are being taken advantage of and suffering the most.
Right, no, I think that's absolutely among the many things that happens. We don't have a lot of support systems in this country.
Right.
So, you lose your job, well, okay, maybe you can get benefits, maybe you won't. And so sometimes people do end up staying with a partner who's dangerous for them, dangerous for their kids, because of course the option is, I mean, I've worked at a domestic violence shelter. I don't recommend that for anybody, honestly. So people do end up trapped. Even well-meaning people, but also really shitty, ill-meaning people traffic their children. So it's sort of like.
And. Well, it becomes a thing of like who do, like, if you're in a vulnerable situation and you're poor, you have very few, who do you trust? Like, do you trust the government and the public programs to be there for you? I mean, just think about what's happened with SNAP in the last month and a half, I mean, the funds have started again, but how much damage has that done to people that need to rely on these systems, their trust in it, and what that effect might be,
Well, and that's just it. It's like, okay, well, if we turn the benefits back on, that's great, but then you have people who were already, their bank account was already in the negative, and then they had 2 weeks where they didn't get any assistance, and they're 2 weeks behind on everything. They skipped a bill, they went and gave an acquaintance a blowjob so that they could get $20 to buy groceries. I mean, this is how sex work, really happens, is which I talk about a little bit in Reckless Oath, my previous book to this one, is just that sometimes that's just how sex work happens, is people get desperate and they need $50 for medicine, for something, and you know a guy that's just kind of sleazy enough that, he would give you $50 for some random sex act that you would perform. And people they get stuck in that, which is also a way to get trafficked.
To the extent it affects our world, I think that, I'll say reservations, that may be politically incorrect, but native reservations in Canada, United States, I think that's just a horrific problem, disappeared weather girls.
And that's all about the vulnerability and the lack of safety net, is if law enforcement dismisses all of these missing people as sex workers because in desperation they've done sex work, then it's safe to abduct a woman from a native reservation, because the police aren't going to come gunning for you. Even if they find out it was you, the odds of there being serious consequences are very, very small. So that's why they're among the most vulnerable people out there.
Very much like that I-70 corridor. I spent 10 years teaching on the Navajo reservation. I'm sorry, I'm your sister. And there are places out there where a body would disappear, it would never.
Well, I've read anywhere within 50 miles of the extraction industry complex, lots of unexplained crimes and disappeared people.
Absolutely, yeah. And those are always the deadliest combination, is you have an industry where it's primarily men, you have a lack of law enforcement involved, and then you have vulnerable people, and then suddenly, you've got people being trafficked, people being murdered, all kinds of awful stuff. Wow, this has been so cheerful. But I mean, it's good to think about, it's good to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, and I think, not to get too high fun, but I think it's important for not, like you're talking about how all these novels, they just want to write fancy novels, and they want to write about the rich, but I think it's really important, and it goes back to I think about Balzac, it's important wrote fancy novel sort of, but it's important for the novel and the novelist to capture all parts of society, you know, not just the rich part or the religious part or whatever, you know. So-
I think this is why, historically speaking, some of the most important books I read were things like, like Sinclair Lewis, writing about people being taken advantage of by industrial, situations, and Victor Hugo. I mean, we've turned Les Miserables into this sort of like this big dramatic production, and there's a musical, but like Les Miserables, the novel, is like, wow. Like desperate people dying for bread. So yeah, I don't know, that was always my literary obsession.
Do you think there's commercial penguins though trying to write about regular people? Because like a lot of novels, like it's an escape, right? Like you have a shitty day, and what you don't want to do is open and be like, oh, this protagonist also having a shitty day. She can't pay her bills either. Oh, it's for example, maybe I'll get trapped. Like, do you think that that's hard sometimes finding publishers or an audience, or do you think there is a large audience out there?
I mean, I think there's I'm making a living at it, so I think there's obviously an audience for fairly serious novels. I mean, works that are fictional, but that ask you to think about real problems. I mean, and I find them, in my own reading, like there's clearly an audience for it. But yes, also there's definitely a big, stripe of readership who prefer escapists. So they prefer like Ellen Hildebrand, beach reads, or they prefer lighter romance novels where everything's going to turn out okay. And I find myself, honestly, when I get to the ends of books, I try to make my books hopeful, because I'm like, God, if you can't come up with something hopeful, where people do escape and people do find something that makes them happy.
Okay, well, I think we can wrap up. So let's give her a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks for the